Okay, folks, what do you see? Sorry, what was that?
Nothing.
Nothing, exactly. And this is how your console should look like in a production environment, right? No errors, no warnings, no debug messages you forgot to get out. I know you all, yeah. But of course, that's not always the case. You sometimes have something like that. Let me zoom in a bit. This type error, can't access property parent node, T is undefined. Anyone ever seen that? Oh yeah, few people, okay. Anyone know how to debug that? Yeah, no, okay, for sure. Or maybe this one is a more classic one. Oh, we have a parent and then mismatch, child nodes versus v nodes, some weird gibberish. Yeah, horrible, I know. And we'll figure out today what these error messages are and how to debug them. So welcome to my talk, Vue.js Hydration Demystified, here at VueConf 2024. Okay, a bit about me. Besides that, unfortunately, we heard some facts already, some good ones, some bad ones. But I'm Alex. I'm a web engineering consultant by day. I'm also a speaker, as you can see, giving workshops to podcast host. We come to that at the end. I'm also part of the Nuxt.js team. Who are here using Nuxt.js? Who are Nuxt.js people? Yeah, a few? Me, come on. Yeah, exactly. Come on. Okay, good. Thanks. Who was here for Daniel's talk in the morning? Yeah, almost everyone. Okay, good. So I hope you'll try Nuxt now. Also a bit active for content on YouTube, doing video week, on Twitch, live stream every now and then, and also sometimes shit posting on Twitter. Well, you know. Having a website and also GitHub, but yeah. Now to the important part. Who of you is using server-side rendering here? Anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Like, yeah, a few. Good. If not, most of you probably never bothered with hydration errors. So I envy you a little bit for that. Yeah, I understand. But what is hydration first of all, right? What exactly is that? Well, let's say we have an application, then we all start very simple when it's server-side rendered, right? We get the HTML, like we do a request to the server gives us back stuff. So we have the HTML, we have inline CSS, we have the serialized state to say like, okay, on the server there were some things happening. We have to transfer the app state for like some JSON inserted, right? And then the site is visible. You see things, you see the content, it's cool. But the site's not interactive yet, right? So the JS, the JavaScript has to be downloaded, right? That has to be executed too and parsed before. And then there's a little replay effect on the client. So Vue.js and Nuxt.js, they run again, or whatever server-side rendering setup you have. Listeners are attached to certain elements, so they're actually interactive. The state is being, well, replayed and then available and taken into account, and then we're ready. And then maybe some of your client-side logic happens, like, okay, on form submit, on mounted, you know, all these things. And hydration is basically in between these two red lines. That's the hydration process. And well, I think, okay, that's not a big deal. Fine. How exactly can that fail? Like, that seems pretty fail-safe. Server's giving some things, we do the same again, all good. But the problem is if there are differences, right? If there are especially different state on the server and on the client. Because the client expects something the server doesn't deliver, we have a problem. So let's go through some cases. There are quite some how that can happen. But a typical one is invalid HTML, right? Little example. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this? Sorry? The div. Yeah, okay, let's get rid of the div. Wonderful. You're all right. And the thing is, the browser is very lenient. It's like, oh, invalid HTML. Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry. I know what you mean. It's okay. I get you. We're all like, we should all write semantic HTML. Still, some people's code, I still see div with a button click handler. It's not that nice because it should be button anyway. So yeah, if we don't write semantic HTML, especially invalid HTML, it is fixed by the browser, but the problem is it is sent as it is by the server. The server won't come and say, oh yeah, I know, it's fine, I will fix it for you. But then the browser will happen, and then you have a mismatch because the browser fixes it, but your application still expects there is a div between that P, which shouldn't be. So then you have a different DOM, and then everything explodes. You see the errors from before. That's a problem. So what's the solution? Pretty easy. Write valid HTML. Of course we all do, right? You all saw the div problem here. It's like nobody would ever mess it up. except me maybe, and probably still you all. The good thing is there's a package, for example, for Nuxt called Nuxt.js HTML Validator, so you can run and validate your HTML straight away, and it will tell you, hey, that's not correct. You can also do it manually. You can throw in the W3C validator, for example, and they will tell you what's all wrong with that. So far, so good. Invalid HTML, check. The easiest to fix. But what's with scripts manipulating your HTML? So let's say we have something like this here, right? And these weird comments there, they are intentional. They're actually necessary. For example, if you have a v4, if you have fragments, slots and all that, Vue is using that. So like, okay, the content in between, because you don't need a root element anymore in Vue 3, that belongs to, for example, slot or v4 element, and so on, so on, so on. But the problem is if you have some kind of auto-optimization, well, it might end up like this. It's gone. Cool, less content. We don't need these comments, it's fine. But of course, the problem is then Vue can't really map that anymore. It breaks. And of course, there are some optimization scripts that for non-SPAs, non-server-side rendered applications as well, they optimize a lot of things. For example, there's auto-optimize in Cloudflare, which is deprecated actually. It will happen that they remove it. But right now, if you enable it, it can cause problems. So yeah, also these placeholder comments, did a long explanation in one of my videos why actually they are needed, but you know the short version of that. When you don't have them, even though they're rendered, well, that will cause issues. So you can't have a proper matching anymore. Okay, sure. That's unfortunate, but the good thing is we can just say, hey, let's disable the auto-optimization, disable the scripts, we're good to go. So also this case, it's rather easy if you know where to look for, right? You have to know that these cause problems in the first place. And well, there's one more thing, and that's one of the most common issues that's not that easy. Different data on the server and on the client. So let's say we have a random number in your components, right? Randomness always, we love it. So I have a ref and say, oh yeah, default value mapped at random. Cool. And if we do exactly that in the component, we do it on the server side, the code will be executed, right? On the client side, the same code will be executed again. And the chance that the random value is still the same is pretty low. So we also have a mismatch there, a hydration mismatch. They will say like, if you render that, or if you use that to render some images, saying like, oh yeah, image between 1 and 10, you do something, it will be maybe 2 on the server, and on the client will be 4, and it'll be like, oh my god, everything breaks. Classic is also date, right? Date differences, or other things that are varying when being re-executed. So what should we do there? We somehow have to find a way to make sure that the values are then properly transferred from the server to the client. And how we do that? Well, Nuxt, for example, we have a composable called useState. So you set a unique key. Instead of using a ref, it will be treated as a ref eventually. Then we say, okay, our initial value is, for example, mapped at random, or you set it to some other value. And if you do things on the server side, they will be transferred to the client side, and the results will be used. So that's more or less the easy fix. But sometimes it's not even necessary that you use the same thing on the server and on client. Sometimes it's enough to say, okay, you know what, these values, maybe I just set them only in the client. Yeah, we can just say only on client side, simple unmounted, random number is null by default or undefined, whatever you prefer there. And then we say random number dot value equals to mapped at random in our unmounted lifecycle code. Okay, doesn't seem too crazy, but worth fixing for sure. And there's one more thing. Import.meta.client. For example, if you do like authentication. Authentication is a big part of applications, of course. And if you don't do it through cookies, then you don't have the information on the server side, right? So you don't know if the user is authenticated when sending the HTML from the server-side rendered application. You might do if you use cookies, then it's a bit easier. But if you use local storage, well, local storage is not a thing on the server side. So let's have an example here, right? People say, okay, let's use process.client or import.meta.client. Say, okay, only on the client side, hey, we'll check some auth checks, like, okay, it's logged in. Because on the server side, no local storage, we can't really use that. But the problem is that this code will also cause issues because import.meta.client, well, that actually runs before the hydration process. So we say, okay, the server says false, the client says true. It's an obvious mismatch, right? So yeah, we more or less with import.meta.client, we say we change the value that the client expects to have from the server. And also here, the solution we've seen before already, it's more or less just execute a client-only code in on-before mount or in on-mounted, and then you're good. So just don't use import.meta.client for these things. If you say like, okay, I have in a function that I will call, I import a library, their import.meta.client is perfect for tree shaking, but in this case, that can cause problems if you set state differently. And of course, there are other cases. So it's not an exhaustive list because there are tons of, but some examples at least. So one of them, let's go first for how to debug them. Maybe that's better. How to debug them. Back in Nuxt 2, back in good old times with Vue 2, there was this blog post. Sorry, halfway light mode. Didn't have dark mode back then. About how to debug the hydration issues that I wrote in, what does it say? Updated 2020, but written in 2018. So 6 years ago or something like that. Because back then, it looked a bit like this, but worse, because now we have proper debugging messages. Since Vue 3.4, we have improved hydration messages saying, okay, there's a mismatch, the server rendered this, the client rendered this, and where, for example, here at app.vue. So it's very lovely that we now know which component is affected and that we can easily debug it. And the best part is, hydration errors are they're notorious for only appearing in production. But because these mismatch checks, you would have to go through all the DOM, right, to traverse it, do like a deep comparison. They're commonly not enabled because that would be a big performance hit. So, good thing is, since Vue 3.4, we can enable them also in production, so please not in your actual prod app, but in maybe a staging or QA environment, through a compile time flag called Vue prod hydration mismatch details, yeah? Or in Nuxt, you can just set debug to true and it will also work. Also, another thing that can help is a module from fellow core team member Julian Huang. It's called Nuxt Hydration, and it will do something like this. From the example from before, it will render like a little blood, little border, and we see the poor DOM, it's hurt, we have to fix it. So what we do when we hover over the icon, we just say like, oh yeah, hey, there's an issue, check the console, there's something mismatching, here's the details, all good, and we see it's from app down there. Okay, so we can debug it. It's not as painful as it was in 2018 or last year. I mean, 3.4 is not that old, right? But maybe we go on one step further and say, oh, hydration, it's such a pain. Can we maybe just get rid of it fully? Like, can we fully remove hydration? And the answer is, well, yeah, we can. We can say hydration, we don't need it anymore. It's pretty simple. We just don't have to use JavaScript. Easy, no problem. And what's sort of like, funny joke. Actually, you can do that. I did it for a website, I'll show you in a bit. And the idea is you can set a no scripts feature flag either for your whole application or through route rules, so for some pages of your Nuxt application. And then there will not be any JavaScript added. So it's perfect if you have a very simple landing page. The problem is, of course, you don't have JavaScript. So what do you do now? No interactivity. The thing is, you can still include JavaScript, but it has to be written in vanilla. You have to use something like usehat. So yeah, it's not a full solution for everything, but for some cases that can work. Okay, any other ideas? Let me think. How about, inferring data from markup, right? You could say, okay, all the state that's sent from the server to the client is somewhere in the HTML. Maybe it is, but the problem is, in very specific cases, it's not, right? Like, for example, for our authentication, with the import.meta.client, for the example, we have that is logged in state, it's true or false. But it's not the HTML. We never save it there. We show a different text maybe, and there would be a simple mapping, but what is with more complex state? So that also doesn't really work. So we have to somehow do that hydration part. But there are two things you can do if you want to. There are two ways to actually change things. Because you can decide what should be hydrated and when it should be hydrated. So let's go through these two use cases. Let's talk about what to hydrate. That's more or less commonly referred to as partial hydration, to say only a part of the application should be hydrated. And a common architecture there is the island architecture, like Astro can do that, right? Or also Vue.js. So from a conceptual point is only hydrate what actually needs to be interactive. The rest is just static by default. And that kind of makes sense, right? Not all pages of application, unless we build the next Gmail client, are interactive. If you have a blog, well, maybe you have like a comment section or like some flyout menus that you don't only do with CSS or dialogue or whatnot, but the big part of the content is not necessarily interactive. So that works, especially for the static content-heavy sites. So as an example here, we see like, okay, all the white things, they're static by default, and the image carousel, yeah, everybody needs an image carousel, of course, slider, that is interactive, and that is JavaScript code attached. The rest is just content. So in a way, it works, but it doesn't work with just plain views straight away. You need a framework like Astro Eels, and as soon as you use other meta frameworks, it's a bit trickier. But it can also work there. Another part that works everywhere, though, is when to hydrate. So say like, okay, we need hydration, but we do it progressively or just lazy. So there we say, you know what? There are lots of elements on our page, and the user doesn't use them all at once. So why not just hydrating the ones that the user will use? Like, let's say the ones above the fold, or when the user is scrolling, or when it's clicking, or when the browser is idle and we're not busy and it's all good. So that works pretty well. And that will, pretty sure this will improve the initial load time of your website, because hydration is expensive. As we said, we have to go through the whole DOM, attach listeners, go through all that. If you have like 3,000 or more DOM nodes, that can take a bit, especially on the lower end devices, right? So that's good. But the problem is, even though the initial load time is nice, maybe the largest contentful pane, first contentful pane, so on, they're good, there is another metric that's important, right? Talk a bit of performance. There is INP, interaction to next page. And if you're not careful with saying like, okay, let's just like defer to later, it's fine, then INP could go pretty bad. Because the point is, if you click on an item and there is no immediate feedback, as in the next, say, 200 milliseconds, but like takes 500 or a second, whatever, then you have the problem that the user thinks, okay, what's wrong? Maybe clicking again. It's not a good experience. And interaction to next page is a core web vital, so it matters for, for SEO in general, for the health of your site, let's say. The good thing is, it was already mentioned by Valerie earlier, there is a module, for example, Nuxt delay hydration. There's also Vue delay hydration, and that can be used to say, okay, let's delay certain parts after browser idle, after click, after scroll. And the good part is it also adds a replay effect to say, okay, you know what? If you click while it's hydrating, we'll just capture all these things and then replay the clicks as soon as it's done. Also, it's another thing that's quite hot off the press. There is an on-pre-hydrate hook now built into Nuxt in the nightly mode that you can use to say, okay, before hydration, do some things. So let's say dark mode, very common thing. After hydrating, it's dark, but before it might be light mode by default. Horrible experience. So maybe you can just use a little bit of code to say before hydration, care about that, do that already. Okay. And let's think a bit further. Let's think, what if we could render components on the server only? If we wouldn't need any hydration for them, but they could be still interactive, yeah? And also, we could say, okay, we could render some kind of client-side components in our server-side components. And the good thing is, there is a solution for that. It's called Nuxt server components. I would also call them reversed islands, in a way. So the idea is that they do the heavy lifting on the server. Their components, they're executed on the server. They give HTML back over the wire to render. There's no hydration needed, just insert the HTML. It's cool. And the best part is they can be reactive. So they can have props, and if there are props changing, there's just another HTTP call to the server that will give the new HTML back. So you can have that. That works already, right now. And the best part is, if you say, okay, I have a so-called server component, and in that server component, I want to use another component that should be interactive, well, that's also possible. We have a Nuxt-client attribute to do exactly that, or also slots where you can pass in interactive objects. For example, like a Nuxt link, which should just do a typical SPA navigation and not a hard reload, right? So that works. One gotcha though, it's experimental by now, but it's usable. It's very important. So I encourage, give them a try. Experimental is also, it's always a weird word because it sounds like, okay, it's broken, I can't use it because it's a big experiment. Experimental can also mean, hey, it works fine, maybe it has some rough edges or edge cases, but for exactly this feature, maybe the API could change in the future because we're not entirely sure if it's the best way to write it that way. But at the moment, if you pin the version, that will just work fine. The only quote-unquote problem you have, okay, you need to read the changelog a bit more if there are updates to the server components because they won't be declared as break-in changes. So that's the only issue with experimental. There are also lots of other experimental features that work fine, but maybe in the underlying package or module, they just need a bit of work on the API. So experimental does not mean unusable. Very important. And if we have a look at this here, let's say we have a website and we say, okay, we have some interactive elements or header because we have some Nuxt links in there and whatnot, and it's, I don't know, built on the client, whatsoever. Our image carousel, of course, and then we have that content block, and that's a server component in orange. And the text content, that can have another component, let's say another image carousel, or, I don't know, a form that can be reactive again and rendered client side. And then our footer, well, okay, we say it's okay, that can be fully static. So you can render the orange things as server components, the green things as usual, and you're good to go. So that works pretty well. Another thing is that in the end, you can even say, give me a whole page and declare it as .server.view, so we can have server pages at the moment. And then also insert the interactive components again. So it's not a big hassle, and it's worth trying, especially for content-heavy sites. And the thing is, of course, that's not it yet. So what's next in terms of hydration in Vue.js, right? There was a problem with component libraries a while ago, and the solution would have been a use ID composable to say, okay, we have IDs, they should be stable on the server side, and they should be somehow transferred to the client side, and they work there too. That will come in Vue 3.5. We added an own use ID composable in Nuxt already to like polyfill that, let's say. But yeah, that's coming. And as I said, it's really good, for example, if you have forms, say like, okay, we have labels, we have an area labeled by attribute for accessibility, and we want to have that for the same elements, so the ID should be stable. Another thing that comes with terms to hydration is a hook to react when mismatches happen. So like we have a hydration mismatch hooks, like, okay, show something, give a warning, whatsoever. So even you have a failsafe in production, say, okay, whenever it happens, it's fine. Let's tell the user, let's log it to our favorite logging service, and so on. And more improvements with regards to lazy hydration are also planned in the future Vue versions. There's nothing fully concrete, but there is a plan to build in lazy hydration more close to the core, which would be lovely because performance would be even better. And there's yet another big thing, of course, Vapor mode. Vapor mode is coming. Anybody excited for Vapor mode here? Okay, I see, great. Yeah, so that's, of course, it's work in progress, it's open source, you can try Vapor mode already, by the way. And let's see what Vapor mode will bring for hydration and for server-side rendering in general. So a few recommendations for better hydration experiments with Vue and Nuxt. Nuxt delay hydration for delaying the hydration until the native support is there, as in the core support. There's Nuxt hydration to debug hydration mismatches, right? Validating your HTML never hurts, always good. And of course, an error logging or tracking through a service of your choice, because, well, we don't want to tell customers, hey, it doesn't work. We want to know it before, maybe even fix it. And it's like, hey, it doesn't work. Like, okay, try it again. Oh, yeah, cool, all good. Quick summary. Hydration is necessary when we use Vue and server-side rendering. If we don't use SSR, all cool, all good. Hydration mismatches can happen through various reasons, right? But they can be debugged, they can be fixed easier now since 3.4. And the hydration experience can be improved with modules, with server components, with plugins. Future hydration improvements are planned. And by that, I would say, hydration demystified.